Up next on Art Rocks, a South Louisiana woman inspired by both the fragility and the durability of this state's plant life.
Definitely growing up in this area, I've been around a lot of plant life and a lot of nature, and I feel like they best reflect me.
A ballet theatre bringing dancers so close you could touch them.
This is an experience where it's up close, it's personal, you can smell it, touch it, feel it in a different way that is lost sometimes in the bigger halls.
We meet an artist who applies a cinematic approach to the painting process.
As his painting Hollywood would later reveal, he basked in movie magic, stemming from the days he worked right alongside early filmmakers.
And visit a museum interpreting a vital chapter in our state's history.
This is the 1904 sugar mill model from the Louisiana Exposition that was in St. Louis, Missouri.
That's all next on Art Rocks.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for Art Rocks. I'm James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine. Now, you've heard the expression, choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. Rachel Sevier has found her niche and she loves every moment of it.
I prefer to refer to myself as a ceramicist because I work in clay. I make pottery as well as sculptural pieces. When someone refers to another person as being a potter, they make mostly like functional pieces, like cups and plates and bowls and things like that. Ceramicist is a little bit more inclusive of all of the kind of odds and ends and things that you can do with clay, because I do both functional and sculptural work.
Rachel Sevier has always known she wanted to be an artist who creates things. But she stumbled into what it was exactly that she wanted to do.
I took a ceramics class just as an elective. I fell in love with it and I started doing 2D work. And then as soon as I touched clay and started making three-dimensional objects and working with the clay, I couldn't turn away. Like, it was just, we were meant to be.
More often than not, Rachel's process begins with ceramics clay, not terracotta or regular clay, and a potter's wheel.
I throw on a potter's wheel, so I start with just raw clay and wedge it up and I throw the form on the wheel. And then for all of my vases and a lot of the pieces that I use for my installation, after they're thrown, I alter the figures and the forms while they're still wet. So I kind of squish them around, and then as they dry, like, I carve into them and do like patterns and textures. The carving that goes into it takes hours. And then they go through one firing process that's called a bisque firing that takes all the moisture out and it kind of hardens the clay. And then I glaze the pieces and they go through a glaze firing. And at that point, they're finished pieces like what you see. I would say from start to finish, those probably took 3 weeks. A cup I can do in a couple days from start to finish because it's just a smaller object and it doesn't take as long to dry.
The young artist prefers working in earthy colors and creating botanical designs.
Definitely growing up in this area, like, I've been around a lot of plant life and a lot of nature, and I feel like they best reflect me. And one of the things that I like best about plants is that there's a juxtaposition in plant life of fragility and strength. They appear to be like so fragile and like they can be like crushed so easily, but they're also really strong and they kind of like persevere through a lot of things.
Look closely at this display of Rachel's work at a local gallery. You can see how she juxtaposes soft paper with firm ceramic pieces to create a design fully inspired by nature.
I like to use rice paper because it's a handmade, very fibrous paper, and it just has like a very fragile look to it. And it is a fragile paper, but it gives that same kind of idea of like the fragility and the strength of like holding up yet being still very fragile. And I like the look of the tracing paper because it has that translucency that like a lot of plant life has, like a delicate translucency to it. So it just kind of adds to that fragile nature of the piece.
Some of Rachel's carvings on her ceramic pieces are so delicate you might miss it if you didn't look closely. But missing the detail could also mean missing some of the beauty.
I like to do lots of very, very detailed patterned carving. So that's a lot in a lot of my work. There's lots and lots of texture and carving that I've kind of gone in with tools.
The carved patterns may be what caused Rachel's mother to fall in love with some of her favorite pieces.
She has several vases that I brought home, and she's like, those are mine, I have to keep them. And I have made her some mugs that have tree carvings on them that she refuses to part with. She's like, you cannot sell these, you cannot give these away, they're mine.
But Rachel says she hasn't created anything yet that she herself can't part with.
I feel like I have a close connection with most things that I make. I enjoy spending the hours cutting paper or carving into a piece, and that's kind of where my attachment is. And then when it's the finished object, it's done and I'm ready to let go of it and move on to the next thing.
Not only is Rachel super talented, she's also fortunate to have the unwavering support of her family. Some parents are reluctant to watch their children pursue a career in the arts. Rachel's told her to do whatever makes her happy, and happy goes a long way. No matter where you live in Louisiana, opportunities to connect with the arts are everywhere, if only you know where to look. So here's a list of standout events in the week to come. To learn more about these and other events in Louisiana, visit lpb.org/artrocks or pick up a free copy of Country Roads magazine. LPB's Art Rocks website also features an archive of previous episodes, so to see any segment again, just log on to lpb.org. The Nevada Ballet Theatre has been bringing classical ballet to Las Vegas stages for more than 40 years. This week, we're sitting in on their studio series, in which audiences are treated to intimate performances paired with opportunities to interact with the dancers themselves. Here's a look.
A benefit that is for subscribers only. They get to talk to the dancers create the work, they ask questions, there's interaction. This is an experience where it's up close, it's personal, you can smell it, touch it, feel it in a different way that is lost sometimes in the bigger halls. I started it a long time ago. Wanting to see and hear from the artists that are in your organization, who influences them choreographically, what type of music inspires them, and at the same time, dancers get so desolate and fearful at the ends of their career because they haven't had any other opportunities within their career other than taking class, learning ballets, and teaching. So if they haven't had the opportunity to teach, I can at least give them an opportunity to choreograph. So I gave them the outline of the music, and I said I wanted 2 women to choreograph for 2 men for 2 women. So they start mixing things up. I thought they did a great job. I especially liked Braden Barnes' piece. He called it a nothing, and that was based off of some jump in motocross that they do where they let go. I was fascinated knowing that Nevada Ballet Theatre has been here for almost 45 years now, and that is also testament to this community and longevity.
You have music, you have dance, you have the visual arts. We're developing all of that in Las Vegas now. For a young town, it's the beginning of a tradition, and it's for the whole family, which is special because Las Vegas, you know, is a gaming town. And now that we have a community of almost 2.1 million people, this should be part of that.
There's a lot of people who live here and work here and are committed to this community, and I think most of this country doesn't view Las Vegas as that. And I'm here to beg to differ because I've seen the communities.
What do I love about the ballet and what keeps me going? Seeing the beautiful young people work, and they work so hard. It's for the love of it, really. And their career is like an athlete. They last maybe till they're in their 30s. And if you see the rigorous training they have to go through to do it right, to be a professional, you see what a love of the art form it is. And they do love it. That's why they do it. And I think that's always an inspiration to me.
The most satisfying aspect of what I do has to do with when you introduce dance, and it's usually the vehicle of the Nutcracker, and kids who walk into the theater for the very first time and look and go, wow. Because to me, it's become relevant instantly. And when you watch a kid's reaction, you know you've done your job for the next generation, because they're going to take that forward.
The mystique of Hollywood was always alluring to the late painter Thomas Hart Benton. Dating from the early 20th century, Benton's murals and paintings echo with the images of Hollywood's golden era and became a signature element of America's regionalist art movement. Let's look now at an illuminating retrospective of Benton's work, an exhibit called American Epics, Thomas Hart Benton and Hollywood.
To understand best how painter Thomas Hart Benton saw the world, look no further than how he saw himself. The diminutive 5'3" painter becomes a study in brawn, tanned, bare-chested, and towering above his wife Rita. He's the magnificent matinee idol.
He looks like he could be a Roman god of the sea or a movie star. And I think that is his effort to say, this is going to be a new kind of a modern American art, and I'm going to be a major player.
And for decades, he was, taking in the landscape and taking on war. He went big with majestic murals and small with intimate character studies. He was both sentimental and provocative. But above all, he was cinematic.
You get that sense of also artificial bright light being projected as if a movie set.
Austin Barron Bailey is the curator of American Epics, Thomas Hart Benton and Hollywood, now getting a starring role at the Peabody Essex Museum. Benton, she says, came of age as cinema did. As his painting Hollywood would later reveal, he basked in movie magic, stemming from the days he worked right alongside early filmmakers.
He works with these people, researching scenery, painting sets, assisting the directors, even having some bit parts.
But Benton saw himself in competition with Hollywood and felt that he could do things movies couldn't.
If you look at the colors of the murals surrounding us, films were entirely in black and white. No vivid color like this jumping off the screen.
Just as directors worked from storyboards, Benton worked from clay models he sculpted. He wanted a hands-on approach to his subjects, too, for what he called the authentic America.
He deliberately goes into what he calls the back counties and the back roads of America, seeking out the overlooked Americans, whether it's, you know, the anonymous Yankee drivers or the cotton pickers in the fields. He really wants to understand the broad experiences of Americans beyond the New York art world where he was making his career.
It made Benton famous, even landing him on the cover of Time magazine in 1934. And that's despite his provocative nature. This series, titled American Historical Epic, took him 8 years to paint, but never found a patron. It didn't quite fall in line with accepted American history.
Certainly the emphasis on racial violence, on exploitation, on struggle, were not exactly the official histories and celebratory heroic narratives that people expected from public art. He does pull back from this in many of his other murals, but he never shies from dealing with politics and controversy in his art.
Especially with the onslaught of World War II, which fueled a fury in Benton. He unleashed a host of propagandistic paintings, brutal for their depictions of rape, disembowelment, and death.
He felt that people were overconfident and over-optimistic, basically apathetic about the threat to the values of freedom and democracy, and that if Americans didn't stand up to this call to action, that the horrors that were happening in Europe could come to America.
After the war, a new America emerged, and with it, new art. Benton's one-time student Jackson Pollock was the new star, and Benton shifted his focus where Hollywood often did, to the West.
Benton was always drawn to myth-making, to American epics, to the notion of what is our national saga.
Throughout his career, Benton worked with the director John Ford as both men indulged their fascinations with the frontier. Later in life, though, Benton took a more wistful view of the West.
He then retreats there as an older man in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and begins to think about the more positive associations of freedom, the effort to try his hand at what he called grand scenery, to think again about the journeys of Lewis and Clark. All of these elements come into play in his awareness of the romance of the West as being something Americans will never give up.
Or in Hollywood parlance, it was a happy ending.
Bringing you back home now for our Louisiana Treasures segment. People in this state have been raising sugarcane, satisfying the world's insatiable sweet tooth for more than 200 years. Huge fortunes were built on the back of the sugarcane crop, and in Port Allen, the West Baton Rouge Parish Museum has a working model of a sugar mill that reveals how that process works. Julie Rose shows us the way.
This is the 1904 sugar mill model from the Louisiana Exposition that was in St. Louis, Missouri. After the St. Louis World's Fair, or the exposition, it went into storage, and over time it was sent down here to Louisiana again when it was in storage, and by the 1980s it was offered to the West Baton Rouge Museum, where it was reassembled and then put on display. So we've had it for several decades. And it's become sort of an iconic piece here in the collection. It's a working sugar mill model that shows the technology from the first part of the 20th century, technology that's still relevant today. The West Baton Rouge Museum is a regional history museum that interprets sugarcane agriculture and sugarcane plantation heritage that goes back over 150 years. We start with the story from 1803 all the way through the antebellum period, Reconstruction, all the way to civil rights.
In 1939, Paul and Helda Strunad of Prague, Czechoslovakia, sent a letter containing a number of dress designs to a cousin living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Desperate to escape Hitler's looming shadow, the couple hoped that these designs would earn them visas to the United States. Tragically, the Strunads did not survive the Holocaust, but their letter did, remaining stored in the United States for more than 70 years. Once the letter and its contents came to light, the Jewish Museum of Milwaukee partnered with the Milwaukee Repertory Theatre to recreate the Strunads' dress designs, thus preserving a small part of the style, the vision, and the dignity of two lives extinguished long before their time.
December 11th, 1939. Dear Elvin, I received your last letter and thank you very much for your kind care. I was very glad to hear that you are troubling to get an affidavit of necessity for my wife as a dress designer. Would you be so kind as to let me know if you have any success in this matter? You may imagine that we have a great interest of leaving Europe as soon as possible because there is no possibility of getting a position in this country. By separate mail, I have sent you some dress designs my wife made. I hope the dress manufacturer you mentioned in your letter will like them. Hoping to hear very soon from you, I remain with kind regards to you and your wife, and with the best wishes for the new year. Yours sincerely, Paul.
Stitching history from the Holocaust is really a look at two different things. It's a very individual look at a specific couple and a specific family, but on a much larger scale, it addresses the huge void of talent, the loss of contributions to the world that were never able to be brought to fruition because of everyone that perished in the Holocaust and all of the hopes and dreams that perished along with them.
This exhibit takes 8 dress designs that were sent to Milwaukee in 1939 from a couple in Prague, Helda Strunad and her husband Paul, to a Milwaukee cousin in the hopes of getting immigration visas. The letters have been in the collection of the museum since before it was a museum. They were given to the Milwaukee Jewish Archives in 1997 by Burton Strunad, who was cleaning out his mother's basement and found them. He had no idea that his father had had this correspondence. His father is Alvin, who is the recipient of these letters.
And within the envelope was a red envelope, and within the red envelope were 8 dress designs, a picture of the woman and her husband, and a letter to Bert Strunad's father. And in that letter, they were seeking help in coming to America to escape the Nazis in Prague.
Paul Strunad in Prague knew that Alvin was trying to help him come to America with his wife, and he enclosed these sketches in the hopes that that would convince people in the United States that they would not be a burden on the economy.
Burton Strunad turned them over to the archives, never knowing, would they be on display. He just knew that they would be preserved.
And when the museum was installed in 2008, it became a focal point of our Holocaust section.
Well, one of our visitors came in, and when she came to this section, she said, "Oh my God," and the story is so poignant. And she said, "There's so much you could do with the dresses." I said, "Like what?" She said, "Well, make them."
And that was the first time we kind of had this sense of the story, that you could have this kind of tangible focus on loss and filling that void in some way to help us, kind of fill in the blanks of who Hedvig and Paul were and what the larger meaning of this story is.
Director Kathy Bernstein approached the Milwaukee Repertory Theatre and spoke with the costume department.
Our shop manager from last season was contacted by the museum about this project, and after she saw the drawings, she was so excited about the project that she said, "We're in."
We received copies of the renderings, and then as project manager on this, I did a bunch of research into the period fashions, using period catalogs, magazines.
We gather all of our research, and then it's time to create patterns. We take fabric, cheap muslin, and we actually drape it on the form to create the patterns. We then cut out the pattern out of an inexpensive fabric. We make a mock-up of the fabric so that we can correct all the problems in the pattern without having to cut it into the real fabric.
The draper hands off the patterns to us once they're ready, and we cut out the fabric, and then we hand off the fabric pieces, the garment pieces, to the stitchers to assemble.
The tailoring techniques we're using are old standard techniques that they would have used back in the 30s that actually we still use today.
There was quite a bit of hand stitching, especially with the tailoring. The pad stitching and the bound buttonholes are all done by hand.
All the dresses are made of natural fibers and fabrics that we would have found in the time period, in the 30s. The only synthetic that I can think that we are using is the thread that holds them together, but Jessica has tried very, very hard to be as faithful to the period as we can.
3 of the looks have printed fabrics in them, and we obviously couldn't source those exact prints, so we had to find somebody to create them.
Margaret Hassett Guy has recreated the prints that Hedvig drew in her drawings. What's really unique about these is you can see the direct correlation between the surrealist movement in art and the prints. And Margaret went beyond Hedvig's designs, and she did research on her own and researched textiles of the period and art of the period and really brought an authenticity to it.
There was no place that was better outfitted than the Milwaukee Reps costume shop to do this. There are people who understand historical research with clothing. There are people who understand how to develop a design and to take it through a whole schematic and go through these things. And they were able to bring this level of professionalism that I don't think any of us entirely accounted for. They also pointed out the challenges very quickly about making the dresses.
They were given these two-dimensional paintings or drawings that you couldn't see what the back was. There was no indication of what the fabrics were. There was no indication of, if a dark spot was a shadow, or is it a fold, is it a pleat.
So everything that you see on display here is a work of interpretation by the Milwaukee Repertory Theater's costume department.
It wasn't enough to just copy. They wanted to be faithful to Hetty's designs.
And it really exceeded all of our expectations in terms of bringing this collection to life. And now we have this series of ensembles that are part of a larger story.
This is a way of exploring one person out of 6 million and who that person was, what talents they brought to this world, what they could have done.
But hopefully people walk away and they will have been enriched by it, and hopefully it gives them pause to think about their family, their history, and what they can do to pay honor to that moving forward.
How serendipitous that the man who discovered the letter and its contents realized what they stood for. That'll do it for this edition of Art Rocks. But remember, you can watch episodes of the show at lpb.org/artrocks. And if you want more, Country Roads magazine brings the best of our state's events, arts, history, cuisine and culture within easy reach. Published monthly, distributed widely. You can find a copy at countryroadsmag.com. Until next week, I'm James Fox Smith, and thanks for watching.